The warm spring sun peeked through the glass windows of downtown's most luxurious shopping district as Rita Chen hurried along the busy sidewalk, her heels clicking against the pavement. Her lunch break had just started, and instead of grabbing her usual salad, she had a mission today: finding the perfect dress for next week's charity gala. As the new head of marketing at Premier Solutions, Rita knew this wasn't just another corporate event. The gala would host their biggest clients, potential partners, and industry leaders. Her presentation had to be flawless, from her speech down to her appearance. After climbing the corporate ladder for 8 years, she had learned that every detail mattered in these high-stakes situations. The boutique's glass doors swoosh open with a gentle chime. Rita instantly felt transported into a world of elegance. Soft lighting illuminated racks of designer dresses, while the faint scent of vanilla and jasmine created an atmosphere of sophistication. A crystal chandelier sparkled overhead, casting delicate patterns on the cream-colored walls. Just browsing, Rita smiled politely at a shop assistant who approached her. She ran her fingers along the silky fabrics, pausing occasionally to check price tags that made her wince. Her husband had insisted she splurge on something special for the event, though. "You've earned it," he had said over breakfast that morning, giving her that warm, encouraging smile that still made her heart skip even after 3 years of marriage. A glimmer of deep blue caught her eye. Hidden between 2 rather flashy gowns was exactly what she had been imagining: an elegant midnight blue dress with delicate beading that caught the light just so. The cut was modern yet classic, the kind of piece that would turn heads without screaming for attention. "Would you like to try that one?" A tall man appeared beside her, his silver name badge identifying him as Raj, a senior sales associate. His crisp suit and perfectly styled hair matched the boutique's upscale atmosphere, but something about his forced smile made Rita slightly uncomfortable. "Yes, please," she replied, pushing aside her unease. Raj pulled the dress from the rack with a flourish that seemed a bit too dramatic. As he led her to the fitting rooms, he launched into a detailed history of the designer and their exclusive partnership with the boutique. Rita nodded politely, though her mind was already imagining herself wearing the dress at the gala. The fitting room was spacious, with warm lighting and a plush velvet ottoman in the corner. 3 mirrors offered views from every angle, and Rita couldn't help but feel a flutter of excitement as she carefully slipped into the dress. The fabric felt like butter against her skin, and the weight of the beading gave it a luxurious feel she'd never experienced in any other dress. Just as she was about to step out to get a better look in the larger mirrors outside, she heard Radha's voice engaged in what sounded like an intense conversation. "No, you don't understand. This client needs special handling. Do you know what these pieces cost?" His tone was completely different from the smooth, professional one he'd used with her minutes ago. Rita smoothed down the dress, checking her reflection one final time. The dress fit like it was made for her, hugging her curves perfectly while maintaining an air of sophistication. For a moment, she forgot about Raz's odd behavior and simply admired how the beading caught the light, creating a subtle shimmer with every movement. Little did she know that in just a few minutes, this perfect moment would turn into one of the most unexpected experiences of her life. Rita stepped out of the fitting room, smoothing the beautiful midnight blue dress one last time. The soft lighting in the boutique made the beading sparkle even more magnificently than she had first noticed. She couldn't help but smile at her reflection in the 3-way mirror. The dress was absolutely perfect for the gala. Raj hurried over, his earlier phone conversation seemingly forgotten as he circled her like a fashion critic. "Stunning choice," he declared, though his eyes seemed more focused on the price tag than the fit. "Let me adjust the back for you." He reached out to straighten the dress, his movements rushed and careless. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. As Raj stepped back, his leather dress shoe caught the delicate beaded hem of the dress. Rita heard the horrible sound of fabric ripping before she felt the cool air on her ankle. Her heart stopped as she looked down to see a jagged tear running up the side of the dress, beads scattering across the plush green carpet like tiny stars. "Oh," Rita gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The damage was significant. A good 6 inches of torn fabric and missing beadwork that had clearly been caught under Raj's shoe. The perfect dress was ruined, and her stomach churned as she remembered seeing the price tag, $3,000. But what happened next was even more shocking than the tear itself. Instead of apologizing, Raj's face hardened into an expression of defensive annoyance. "You need to be more careful while trying on our designer pieces," he said, his voice dripping with accusation. "These dresses are extremely delicate." Rita couldn't believe her ears. "Excuse me? You were the one who stepped on it." She could feel her cheeks burning with a mixture of embarrassment and anger. Other customers were starting to glance their way, and a younger sales assistant hovering nearby looked uncomfortable. "I most certainly did not," Raj replied, drawing himself up to his full height. "I've been doing this job for 15 years, and I know how to handle designer clothing. Perhaps if you're not used to shopping in establishments like this." He let the insult hang in the air, unfinished but clear. The boutique manager, a woman in her 50s wearing a sharp black suit, emerged from the back office, drawn by the commotion. "Is everything all right here?" she asked, her eyes widening as she took in the damaged dress. "Your employee just ripped this dress and is now trying to blame me for it," Rita explained, fighting to keep her voice steady. She was a professional who handled million-dollar marketing campaigns. She wasn't about to lose her composure in a boutique, no matter how infuriating the situation. The manager, whose name tag read Mrs. Lin, examined the tear with pursed lips. "I apologize for the situation, but store policy is clear. Any damage to merchandise must be paid for in full. We can process your payment at the register." Rita felt her blood pressure rising. "I'm not paying for something I didn't do. There must be security cameras in here. Can we please review the footage?" "I'm afraid that's not necessary," Mrs. Lin replied smoothly. "Our staff are highly trained professionals. Now, will you be paying by credit card or cash?" Rita pulled out her phone with shaking hands. There was only one person she could think to call right now, her husband. He always knew how to handle difficult situations with a level head. As she dialed his number, she noticed Raj smirking slightly while whispering something to Mrs. Lin. Little did they know, that smirk was about to be wiped off his face in the most unexpected way. Rita's fingers trembled as she waited for her husband to pick up, watching as Mrs. Lin wrote up what appeared to be a damage report. 1 ring, 2 rings, and then, "Hello, honey. I need your help." The tension in the boutique grew thicker by the minute. Rita stood her ground, still wearing the damaged dress, while Mrs. Lin continued writing up the incident report with exaggerated slowness. Reg hovered nearby, his earlier smirk replaced by an impatient tap of his foot against the plush carpet. "My husband will be here shortly," Rita announced, her voice steadier than she felt. She'd caught the look that passed between Raj and Mrs. Lin, a mixture of annoyance and dismissal that made her blood boil. They clearly thought she was bluffing, trying to buy time or avoid payment. "Ma'am, we have other customers waiting to use the fitting rooms," Raj said, gesturing to a small queue that had formed. "You'll need to either change out of the dress or purchase it, with the additional damage fees, of course." His tone dripped with fake politeness that felt more insulting than outright rudeness. Rita took a deep breath. "I'll change when you agree to check the security footage." She pointed to the small black dome in the ceiling corner. "The truth is right there on camera. I don't understand why you're refusing to look at it." A well-dressed elderly woman in the queue whispered loudly to her companion, "How embarrassing, making such a scene over a simple accident." Rita felt her cheeks burn, but she remembered her husband's words over the phone. "Don't let them pressure you. I'll be there in 10 minutes." Mrs. Lin stepped forward, clipboard in hand. "The total comes to $3,450, including the damage assessment fee." She paused, adding with false sympathy, "We do offer payment plans for." Unexpected situations like this. Rita felt her professional calm starting to crack. I manage million-dollar marketing campaigns. This isn't about the money. It's about principle. Your employee damaged the dress and is lying about it. Are you suggesting I'm a liar? Raj interjected, his face reddening. I've dressed celebrities, CEOs, even a few minor royals. I don't make amateur mistakes like stepping on dresses. Just then, a young sales assistant who had been quietly watching everything unfold stepped forward. Actually, Mrs. Lin. She began hesitantly, but Raz shot her a glare that made her shrink back. May, don't you have inventory to check? Mrs. Lin said sharply. The young assistant scurried away, but not before giving Rita an apologetic look that spoke volumes. The confrontation was drawing more attention now. Other customers pretended to browse nearby racks while obviously eavesdropping. A security guard by the entrance kept glancing their way nervously, as if unsure whether to intervene. The damage pattern clearly shows the tear came from below, Rita pointed out, her marketing eye catching details. How could I possibly have caused that while wearing the dress? Perhaps you were walking carelessly, or turned too quickly, Raj suggested, though his confidence seemed to waver slightly. Designer dresses require a certain sophistication to wear properly. The boutique's grand entrance doors swung open, letting in a burst of sunlight. Rita felt relief wash over her as a familiar figure stepped inside. Her husband walked with purpose, his usual warm smile replaced by an expression she rarely saw, the one he wore when things were about to get very interesting. Mrs. Lin stepped forward, already launching into her practiced speech about store policy and damage fees. But she stopped mid-sentence as she got a better look at Rita's husband's face. Even Raj's superior expression faltered. The security guard suddenly stood straighter. A few older employees who had been pretending to fold clothes nearby froze in place. The atmosphere in the boutique shifted so dramatically that even the customers could feel it. Rita watched as all the color drained from Raj's face. His mouth opened and closed without making a sound, like a fish out of water. Mrs. Lin's clipboard slipped from her fingers, clattering on the marble floor in the sudden silence. No one moved. No one spoke. The entire boutique seemed to hold its breath as Rita's husband took another step forward, his shoes clicking against the floor in the heavy silence. The truth about his identity was about to change everything. When Rita called her husband during her lunch break, she expected his usual calm advice. What she didn't expect was the steel in his voice when he said, "Don't worry, dear. Don't pay a thing. I'll handle this personally." Something about his tone made her pause. There was a confidence there she'd never quite heard before. The 10 minutes she waited in the boutique felt like hours. She still wore the damaged dress, refusing to change until the situation was resolved. Her mind wandered to 3 years ago, when she first met him at a local coffee shop. He was so different from the high-powered executives she usually encountered in her work, humble, kind, always wearing simple but well-made clothes. He told her he worked in retail management, and she loved how his eyes lit up when talking about customer service and business ethics. Now, watching him walk through the boutique stores, Rita saw a side of her husband she'd never witnessed before. His usual gentle demeanor was replaced with something else, an aura of quiet authority that seemed to fill the entire space. He wore the same charcoal gray suit he'd left home in that morning, but somehow it looked different now, as if she was seeing it through new eyes. "Sorry I'm a bit late, sweetheart," he said, giving her a quick kiss on the cheek. Traffic on Fifth Avenue was terrible. His voice was warm when addressing her, but as he turned to face Mrs. Lin and Raj, it took on a different quality, one that made both of them visibly stiffen. "Mr. Chen," Mrs. Lin whispered, her clipboard forgotten on the floor. We had no idea." Rita's mind spun. They knew him. How did they know him? She looked at her husband, Thomas Chen, the man who insisted on doing his own grocery shopping, who spent weekends tending to their small garden, who always said the secret to happiness was living simply. Raj, Thomas said calmly, would you mind explaining why my wife is being accused of damaging a dress that, according to our security logs, you clearly stepped on yourself? Raj's face had gone from pale to ashen. Sir, there must be some mistake. I didn't realize she was. That she was what? Thomas's voice remained quiet, but it carried across the now silent boutique. My wife? And would it have made a difference in how you treated her if you'd known? He paused, letting the question hang in the air. Because if so, we have an even bigger problem than a damaged dress. Rita watched this exchange with growing amazement. The other customers had stopped pretending to shop and were openly staring now. The young assistant, me, had crept back out, a look of satisfaction on her face as she watched Raj squirm. Me, Thomas called out, making the young woman jump. You've been here 6 months, correct? Would you please tell everyone what you saw? Mai straightened her shoulders, glancing nervously at Mrs. Lin before speaking. I saw Mr. Raj catch his shoe on the dress hem while adjusting it, sir. He pulled away too quickly, and that's what caused the tear. Thomas nodded, then turned to Mrs. Lin. The security footage will confirm this, I assume, though I'd rather not have to review it, given what I've just heard about how my wife was treated. Mrs. Lin looked like she might faint. Of course, Mr. Chen. We'll take care of everything immediately. The dress will be replaced at no cost, and we'll add store credit for Mrs. Chen's inconvenience. Rita's head was swimming with questions. The way these people were acting, the trembling respect in their voices, the way the security guards stood at attention, how even the regular customers seemed to sense something significant was happening. Who exactly was her husband? Thomas placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Would you like to change out of the dress now, dear? I think we need to have a conversation about what I actually do for a living. His eyes twinkled with a mixture of apology and amusement. Though I have a feeling you're starting to figure it out. As Rita headed back to the fitting room, still trying to process everything that had just happened, she heard Thomas addressing the staff about proper customer service and respect. His voice carried the unmistakable weight of authority, the kind that came from being much more than just a retail manager. Back in her own clothes, Rita sat beside Thomas in the boutique's private VIP lounge, a room she hadn't even known existed until 5 minutes ago. The space was elegantly decorated with soft leather chairs and modern art pieces, but she barely noticed any of it. Her eyes were fixed on her husband, who suddenly seemed both familiar and strange at the same time. So, she said, trying to keep her voice light, retail management, huh? She watched as a guilty smile spread across his face, the same endearing smile that had first caught her attention in that coffee shop 3 years ago. Well, technically, I wasn't lying, Thomas replied, loosening his tie slightly. I do manage retail, just maybe on a slightly larger scale than I implied. He reached for her hand across the small coffee table between them. I'm the CEO of Luxury Retail International. We own this boutique chain, along with about 30 other luxury brands worldwide. Rita felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Her husband, her Thomas, who insisted on fixing their leaky kitchen faucet himself and got excited about discount grocery shopping, was the CEO of one of the largest luxury retail groups in the world. But why didn't you tell me? She managed to ask, her mind racing through countless memories, seeing them in a new light. All those business trips she'd thought were for his regional manager position, the way he always seemed to know exactly what was trending in fashion. Thomas squeezed her hand gently. When I met you, I'd just been named CEO after my father stepped down. I'd watched him live his whole life unable to trust if people liked him for himself or his position. Then I met this amazing woman in a coffee shop who treated me like a normal person, who got excited about finding good deals and worked hard for everything she had. His eyes softened with memory. I just wanted to be Thomas. Just Thomas. Outside the VIP lounge, They could hear the bustling sounds of the boutique returning to normal. Through the frosted glass walls, Rita could see Mrs. Lin's silhouette directing staff, her movements notably more energetic than before. "You should have seen your marketing campaigns before I met you," Thomas continued, a hint of pride in his voice. "They were brilliant. That's actually how I first learned about you. Your work caught my eye during a board meeting. Then running into you at that coffee shop, it felt like fate." Rita's mind was still processing everything. "Wait, those mysterious contract wins my agency got last year were completely based on merit," Thomas finished firmly. "I recuse myself from those decisions. Your work speaks for itself, Rita. It always has." A soft knock interrupted them. Mai entered with a tray of tea, her hands shaking slightly as she set it down. "Mr. Chen, the new dress has been prepared as requested, and Mr. Raj is waiting in your office upstairs." Thomas nodded. "Thank you, me. And thank you for speaking up earlier. That took courage." After May left, Rita turned to her husband. "You're not going to fire him, are you?" Thomas smiled. "You're worried about the person who just tried to charge you $3,450 for something that wasn't your fault." "Well, yes," Rita admitted. "Everyone deserves a chance to learn from their mistakes. Besides," she added with a small smile, "I married a retail manager who turned out to be a CEO. Maybe Raj can surprise us too." Thomas laughed, that genuine, warm laugh she'd fallen in love with. "And this is exactly why I fell in love with you. No, I'm not firing him. He's getting transferred to our customer service training department. Sometimes the best way to learn empathy is to experience both sides of the counter." Rita sipped her tea, watching her husband as he briefly checked his phone, probably managing the minor crisis their visit had caused. He was still her Thomas, she realized. The same kind, thoughtful man who forgot to put the coffee pot back and always remembered to water her plants when she worked late. He just happened to own the coffee shop and the plant store too. "So," she said, a teasing note entering her voice, "any other little surprises I should know about? Secret private jet? Hidden mansion?" Thomas looked up from his phone, that familiar mischievous glint in his eye. "Well, now that you mention it." The next morning arrived with a flurry of activity at the boutique. Word had spread quickly through the luxury retail community about yesterday's incident, though not quite in the way anyone expected. Rather than a scandal, it became a lesson in leadership. Thomas sat in his previously hidden office on the boutique's upper floor, reviewing security footage with his management team. The space was surprisingly modest for a CEO. Simple leather furniture, family photos, and a wall covered in customer feedback cards he'd collected over the years. "Play that section again," he requested, leaning forward as the screen showed Rita's interaction with Rita. The room fell silent as they watched the incident unfold from multiple angles. "Notice anything interesting?" Mrs. Lin, who looked much less intimidating than yesterday, pointed at the screen. "He's done this before," she said quietly. "The way he positions himself, the quick step back, it's almost practiced." "Exactly." Thomas paused the footage. "Our customer complaint records show 7 similar incidents in the past 3 months. All involving expensive dresses, all blamed on customers." He turned to face his team. "How did we miss this?" The room shifted uncomfortably. One of the regional managers spoke up. "We were too focused on sales numbers. Raj's sales figures were impressive. So we ignored the red flags," Thomas finished. He stood up and walked to the window overlooking the busy street below. "My wife was treated poorly in our store yesterday. Not because she was my wife, but because she was a customer. That's unacceptable." The door opened and Raj entered, looking like he hadn't slept all night. His usual confident demeanor was gone, replaced by genuine nervousness. "You wanted to see me, Mr. Chen." Thomas turned from the window. "Yes, Raj. Please sit down." He gestured to an empty chair. "Do you know why you're here?" To receive my termination, I assume, Raj replied, his voice barely above a whisper. Actually, no. Thomas sat back down at his desk. You're here because you're about to become our most valuable training asset. Confusion crossed Raj's face. Mrs. Lin and the other managers looked equally surprised. Starting next week, you'll be heading to our customer service training center, Thomas continued. Not as a trainer, as a trainee. 3 months of intensive customer service education, followed by 6 months rotating through various positions in our stores, including, he added with a slight smile, working in the returns and complaints department. Raj's eyes widened. You're not firing me. Firing you would be easy, Thomas replied. Teaching you and learning from this incident, that's the harder but better path. You have excellent product knowledge and sales skills, Raj. What you need to develop is empathy. The tension in the room eased slightly. Mrs. Lin nodded in approval, while other managers started taking notes. But first, Thomas continued, you'll personally handle the replacement of every dress involved in similar incidents over the past 3 months. Full refunds, sincere apologies, and a written explanation of what you learned from this experience. All 7 dresses, Raj stammered. 8, actually. We found another case this morning. Thomas pulled out a folder. And you'll be accompanied by May, who showed more integrity yesterday than many people with twice her experience. As if on cue, May appeared at the door, clipboard in hand, ready to begin her new role as customer service supervisor. One more thing, Thomas added, his voice taking on a warmer tone. Yesterday, my wife suggested giving you a second chance. She believed you could learn and grow from this. Don't prove her wrong. Raj stood up straighter, something shifting in his expression. I won't stir. Thank you. And please thank Mrs. Chen for me. After the meeting dispersed, Thomas stayed behind with Mrs. Lin to draft new customer service guidelines. The incident had revealed gaps in their training system that needed addressing. As they worked, store employees below were already implementing changes, treating each customer with renewed attention and respect, regardless of appearances or assumptions. By afternoon, the story circulating through luxury retail circles wasn't about a ruined dress or an angry CEO. Instead, it was about a leader who turned a potential scandal into a teaching moment and a company that valued growth over punishment. The incident that could have ended careers instead sparked a transformation in how the company approached customer service. And somewhere in her marketing office across town, Rita was smiling at her phone, reading a message from her husband. Just finished the meetings. Dinner tonight at that little place we love. I promise. No more surprises. Well, maybe just one small one. The small Italian restaurant was buzzing with its usual evening crowd when Rita and Thomas arrived. It was the same family-owned place where they'd had their first date. Plastic checkered tablecloths, slightly wobbly chairs, and the best pasta in town. The owner, Mr. Romano, greeted them with his usual warmth, though Rita noticed he seemed extra attentive tonight. Your usual corner table, he said with a wink, leading them to their favorite spot by the window. Rita wondered if he'd known all along who Thomas really was. Once seated, Thomas loosened his tie and smiled at his wife. You'll never guess what happened today after our meeting with Raj. Rita took a sip of water, still amazed at how her husband could switch from powerful CEO to the same gentle man she'd married. Tell me everything. Well, after we set up Raj's training program, something unexpected happened. The story got out, not about the dress incident, but about how we handled it. By lunch, I had calls from 3 other retail CEOs asking about our customer service training program. The waiter brought their usual orders without them having to ask. Rita's penne arrabbiata and Thomas's spaghetti carbonara. Some things, at least, hadn't changed. So what did you tell them? Rita asked, twirling pasta onto her fork. I told them the truth, that we learned more from yesterday's incident than from a dozen corporate seminars. Thomas paused to thank the waiter who refilled their water glasses. It made me realize something. We've been focusing on the wrong things in retail. Sales figures, profit margins, they're important, but not at the cost of basic human decency. Rita watched as he pulled out his phone and showed her an email. It was a resignation letter from a store manager in their Tokyo branch, admitting to similar practices of blaming customers for damaged merchandise. They're coming forward on their own, Thomas explained. The story inspired people to be honest about past mistakes. That's incredible, Rita said, genuinely impressed. But what about that small surprise you mentioned in your message? Thomas's eyes twinkled. Remember how you always said big companies should do more to help small businesses? Rita nodded, thinking of all their conversations about corporate responsibility. Well, I made some calls. Starting next month, we're launching a mentorship program. Small boutique owners can apply for training, resources, and support from our company. No strings attached, no hidden agendas. Just sharing knowledge. Really? Rita's eyes lit up. She'd seen too many small shops close down, unable to compete with larger chains. Really? And I want you to help design it. Thomas reached across the table and took her hand. Your marketing expertise, combined with your genuine care for people, it's exactly what this program needs. But won't your board object? This could cost millions, Rita pointed out. Actually, they loved it. Turns out doing the right thing can be good for business too. We're calling it the Community First Initiative. Just then, Mr. Romano appeared with a special dessert, the tiramisu they'd shared on their first date. On the house, he said warmly, to celebrate your new project. As they enjoyed their dessert, Rita noticed something else had changed. Thomas seemed more relaxed, as if keeping his identity secret had been a weight he was glad to put down. You know, she said thoughtfully, I understand now why you didn't tell me about your position when we met, but I hope you know it wouldn't have changed anything. Thomas squeezed her hand. I know that now, and that's exactly why I fell in love with you. As they left the restaurant, walking hand in hand down the busy street, several shop owners waved at them from their stores. Word had already spread about the new mentorship program, bringing hope to the small business community. Oh, by the way, Thomas added casually as they walked, there's a charity gala next week. I heard you might need a dress. Rita laughed, playfully swatting his arm. Very funny. But seriously, what should I wear? Now that everyone knows who you are. Wear whatever makes you feel comfortable, Thomas replied. Just maybe. Let's shop at a different boutique this time. Their laughter echoed down the street as they headed home, both knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities. But now they would face them together, with no more secrets between them. News travels fast in the luxury retail world. Within a week of the dress incident, the story had taken on a life of its own. But not in the way anyone expected. Instead of gossip about a CEO's secret identity, people were talking about something much more meaningful. How one incident had sparked a complete change in customer service culture. Rita sat in her office, scrolling through her emails with amazement. Her inbox was flooded with messages from small business owners eager to join Thomas's new mentorship program. Each story touched her heart. Family businesses struggling to survive, passionate entrepreneurs with brilliant ideas but limited resources, artisans trying to preserve traditional crafts in a modern world. You've got another call. Her assistant poked her head in. This time, it's a boutique owner from a small town upstate. She's crying because she just got accepted into the program. Rita smiled, remembering how Thomas had stayed up late for 3 nights straight, personally reviewing applications. He'd insisted on including shops from small towns and rural areas, not just big cities. Put her through, she said. The conversation with the boutique owner, Mrs. Lee, moved Rita deeply. Mrs. Lee had been running her small dress shop for 30 years, watching helplessly as big chains slowly took over her town. I was ready to give up, she admitted. Then I heard about your husband's program. It gave me hope. After the call, Rita walked to the window of her office, looking out at the busy street below. She thought about how different things were now. Just last month, she'd been Rita Chen, marketing executive. Now she was still Rita Chen, marketing executive, but also the wife of one of the most influential people in retail. Yet somehow, Thomas had managed to keep their life surprisingly normal. Her phone buzzed with a message from May, who had flourished in her new role as customer service supervisor. The message included a photo of Raj leading his first training session at the customer service center. He was standing before a group of new employees, sharing his story with surprising honesty. Today's topic: what I learned from the biggest mistake of my career. Me's message read: he's actually really good at this. Who knew? The boutique where it all happened had transformed too. Mrs. Lin had taken Thomas's lessons to heart, implementing a new training program that focused on empathy first, sales second. The store's customer satisfaction ratings had skyrocketed. Rita's computer pinged with a new email, the final draft of the Community First Initiative brochure she'd been working on. The program had grown beyond anything they'd initially imagined. It now included mentorship, financial guidance, technology support, and even a marketplace where small businesses could showcase their products alongside luxury brands. What do you think? Thomas's voice came from her office doorway. He stood there with 2 coffee cups from their favorite local cafe, the same one where they'd first met. It's amazing, Rita replied, accepting the coffee. But how did you get your board to approve such a big expansion of the program? Thomas sat on the edge of her desk, something he'd done countless times before when visiting her at work. Only now, she noticed how her colleagues in the office outside tried to pretend they weren't watching their CEO having a casual coffee with his wife. I showed them the numbers, he said, grinning. Turns out, helping small businesses helps us too. When local shopping districts thrive, everyone benefits, even luxury brands. Rita took a sip of her coffee, made exactly how she liked it, just like that first morning they'd met. You know, people keep asking me if I feel different now, knowing who you really are. And do you? She thought about their morning routine, how he still forgot to put the cap back on the toothpaste, how they still argued about whose turn it was to do the dishes, how he still sent her silly memes in the middle of important meetings. The only difference, she said with a smile, is that now I know why you never let me pay for dinner. Thomas laughed, that same warm laugh that had first caught her attention in the coffee shop. Speaking of dinner, don't forget we have the charity gala tomorrow night. Ah yes, the famous gala that started it all. Rita glanced at the garment bag hanging in the corner of her office. Inside was a beautiful evening gown, purchased from Mrs. Lee's boutique. Ready to finally show the world who you really are. Thomas stood up, straightening his tie with an exaggerated flourish. The real question is, are they ready to meet the woman who keeps me grounded? As they shared a quiet laugh, Rita realized that sometimes the biggest changes in life don't change who we are at all. They just reveal it to the world. The evening of the charity gala arrived with a buzz of excitement in the air. The grand ballroom of the city's most prestigious hotel sparkled with crystal chandeliers and elegant decorations. But all eyes were on the main entrance, waiting for one particular couple to arrive. Rita stood in front of the mirror at home, making final adjustments to her dress, the one from Mrs. Lee's boutique. It was a stunning deep purple gown that made her feel both elegant and comfortable. Thomas appeared behind her, looking handsome in his tuxedo. Having second thoughts, he asked gently, noticing her nervous fidgeting with her earrings. A few, she admitted. Until last week, I was just another marketing executive at these events. Now you're still just Rita, Thomas finished, wrapping his arms around her waist. The same woman who fought for what was right in that boutique, who suggested giving Raj a second chance, and who's helping transform our entire company culture. Their driver waited patiently outside their modest townhouse. Thomas had insisted on keeping their home even after Rita learned about his position. "It's where we fell in love," he'd said. "That makes it worth more than any mansion." As they pulled up to the hotel, camera flashes lit up the entrance. Word had gotten out that Thomas Chen, the famously private CEO of Luxury Retail International, would finally be making a public appearance with his wife. "Ready?" Thomas squeezed her hand. Rita took a deep breath. "Ready." They stepped out of the car together, and the whispers began immediately. But they weren't the judgmental kind Rita had feared. Instead, she heard snippets of conversation about the Community First initiative, about the changes in customer service policies, about the small business mentorship program. Inside the ballroom, they were greeted by familiar faces: Mrs. Lin, looking elegant in a black gown; May, confident in her new role as she directed the event staff; and even Raj, who had become somewhat of a celebrity in the retail training world. "Mrs. Chen," Raj approached them with genuine warmth. "Thank you again for believing in second chances. Our new training program has already helped over 50 employees find better ways to connect with customers." Before Rita could respond, Mrs. Lee appeared, beaming with pride. She was wearing one of her own designs, part of her new collection that would be featured in selected luxury boutiques next season. "You two started something amazing," Mrs. Lee said, her eyes tearing up slightly. "My shop was about to close. Now I'm mentoring 3 other small business owners in my town." The evening progressed like a dream. Rita watched as Thomas gave his first public speech as CEO, announcing the expansion of the Community First initiative to international markets. The audience erupted in applause when he shared their vision of a retail world where luxury brands and small businesses could thrive together. "And none of this would have happened," Thomas said, looking directly at Rita, "if my wife hadn't stood her ground in one of our boutiques, reminding us what true customer service means." Later, as they swayed together on the dance floor, Rita couldn't help but laugh at how life had turned out. "You know," she whispered, "when I walked into that boutique looking for a dress, I never imagined it would lead to all this." "Sometimes the best things in life come from unexpected moments," Thomas replied. "Like meeting the love of your life in a coffee shop or learning your biggest business lesson from a torn dress." As the evening wound down, they slipped away from the crowd and found themselves on the hotel's balcony, looking out over the city lights. The same city where their story began, where a simple coffee shop meeting had led to love, where a damaged dress had sparked a retail revolution. "So," Rita said, leaning against the railing, "what's next for us?" Thomas smiled, that familiar warm smile that still made her heart skip. "Well, Mrs. Lee mentioned she's designing baby clothes now." Rita's eyes widened as she caught his meaning. Their laughter floated out over the city, carrying with it the promise of new beginnings and more wonderful surprises to come. And somewhere in the city, a small coffee shop was closing for the night, its worn chairs and simple tables waiting for tomorrow's customers. Maybe even another couple whose story was just beginning to unfold.